Welcome back. We're with New York Congressman Anthony Weiner, and of course talking about that subject that people are really tired of talking about, really, because they don't understand it. Healthcare reform. And people are more concerned now about the economy and creating jobs. And the president seems to have gotten that message. I think all Democrats have. There seems to be an anti-incumbency sentiment across the country.
Yeah. Well, look, I got to tell you something, but it's not whether we fix health care, it's just when. I mean, it's 20% of our gross domestic product right now, compared to that's 4 times as much as any other country. If we don't do something, it's going to consume more and more and more. And I'll give you an interesting statistic. The accumulated budgets of all 50 states are now in deficit, all 50 states, of $330 billion. Of that, almost 30% is health care, and it's growing. So if we don't fix health care, our taxes are going to go up locally. We're going to have teachers going to have to get laid off. We're going to have to figure out services that we're going to cut. So it's not whether we fix health care, it's just when, and that's why it's so important. We can't keep going up $1,000 every single year, because let's remember something. You are paying for my health insurance as a federal employee, all the federal retirees, all the state retirees, all the city retirees, plus all the city workers. So you and I are kind of the employers for an enormous number of people. We're paying that health care bill, and we simply can't keep up with those
costs. So you say it's a matter of when. Everything in life is timing.
Right.
The timing right now with unemployment that was hitting up at 10%, and the economic conditions in the country, that people are more concerned about jobs and having what to eat and putting the food on the table. That is, there seems to be jobs, jobs, jobs. You say this would create jobs, but in the perception of the people of this country, that is not the answer that they're seeking, and I think the president recognized that. He got the message from that Democratic loss in Massachusetts, what the people were saying. It was more of a referendum on health care reform, was it not?
You can oversell that a little bit. You know, if you look at what was talked about in Massachusetts, there was a poll done after Massachusetts of people who actually voted. And 2/3 of them said not that Congress was doing too much on health care, but not enough. That we had not been aggressive and maybe clear enough about the things we were trying to do. It's also important to realize something, that for a lot of people don't realize that if they have health insurance, they still have a big problem because of this amount of money that they're paying in taxes. We in Queens have 3 fewer hospitals than we had just a year ago. Why? Because so many people who are uninsured are coming into those hospitals, and it's not like the bill fairy comes in and pays those bills. Someone is paying for them. We are, as taxpayers, or the hospital is getting stuck with the bill, and they're closing. So if you think we didn't lose a lot of jobs when 3 hospitals closed in New York City, you got another thing coming. And every single day in this country, 17,000 Americans lose their health care. That doesn't mean they don't get sick. They still get sick. They go to hospital emergency rooms. We pay the bill. So this is not a question of whether it's impacting the economy, but whether or not we should also be saying, you know what, same time we're fixing health care, let's do other things to encourage more people to get hired. But I'll tell you an interesting statistic. They make Chevy automobiles on both sides of the Canadian border in Michigan and in Toronto. The same exact car, the Chevy Impala. The Chevy Impala costs $7 more per hour per worker in the United States than it does in Canada. So Chevy said, we're closing that plant and going to make them entirely in Canada. That's because Canada has a comprehensive health care plan. We don't. Those are jobs. You can't separate health care from job creation. They are one and the same.
Let's try and do a public service right now. Let's try and explain and settle some of this confusion. First of all, there's great concern that the government will be taking control of health insurance. Would you respond to that? And how
well, for about 47%, almost 50% of all Americans right now, they get their health insurance through Medicare, Medicaid, the VA, or the Department of Defense. The question is, when we pay our tax dollars, when we pay our dollars for health care to a doctor, who's in between? For some people, it's the government. We give our money to Medicare and Medicare. Medicare pays the doctors. For some people, a lot of people, it's a health insurance company. The difference here is when the health insurance company gets your money, they take 20% of it for themselves, sometimes as much as 30% for themselves. It doesn't buy a checkup. It doesn't buy an operation. That money that health insurance companies are getting are just going for their shareholders' profits and for the bonuses for their executives. And I suggest, why? Why are we giving money to insurance companies to pay the doctors? Why don't we just pay them directly, cut out the middleman? That's what Medicare does. That's why Medicare is so much more efficient.
Are you suggesting there's no need for private insurance?
I don't see one. I don't know what private insurance companies do today. You know, our car insurance companies, they do something. They aggregate the risk across the entire pool. They perform a service. Health insurance companies don't do that because they don't cover anyone that's old. And frankly, they don't cover people that are sick either. They do everything they can to drop those.
So
people.
how would this proposal, how would this impact people who already have insurance?
What would happen under, here's what I'd like to see. When people become 65, they become eligible for Medicare. So you've got years before you have to worry about that. Why do we have that happen at 65? Why not have it happen at 55 or 45 or 35? Why don't we have then, if we're already paying into our Medicare taxes in order to get that care, we just pay in, and rather than pay an insurance company 30% in profits, we pay a little bit less and give it to Medicare to administer the health care. I want to make sure you understand one thing, though. This notion of government-controlled health care, government isn't going to be hiring the doctors or hiring the hospitals. It's just a matter of who's going to pay those bills. Are we going to have an overhead of 1% like Medicare or 30% like Oxford and Aetna and these other companies have? And so far, the health insurance lobby has been very effective at saying, oh, no, you don't want to lose your Aetna or your Oxford. But if you ask people that have Medicare whether they like it, almost every one of them, 96% in the last survey said they did.
Now, Medicare, that is a single-payer option similar to the one that's in this proposed bill, correct?
Correct. Well, no. The single-payer idea of expanding Medicare to more Americans was something that I originally proposed, and a lot of Americans like, and frankly, people like Medicare. But we've gone away from that because the president said, no, we're just going to help people get private insurance. But he said one other thing, and we all agree. He says, let's have, if the private insurance companies, to keep them honest, let's have for anyone who doesn't have insurance, they can also get what's called the public option, which is a government plan like Medicare that people can choose if they don't like Oxford or they don't like Aetna or they don't like Blue Cross. They can try this public option, which essentially would allow them to get a plan like Medicare. Now, it would only be open to very few people because it's only for the uninsured. But that was what the public option debate was all about. Should we have a little competition from the government here to help keep down costs? Because everything is about the same question, Marvin.
Is public option off the table now?
Well, look, it's in the House bill, not in the Senate bill. And the Republicans have said we're going to go along with anything that has the public option in it. But then again, they've said we're not going to go along with anything that doesn't have the public option in it. So I think I'm hopeful at this, when the president addresses this next week at this bipartisan, he says, I want the public option. The American people overwhelmingly like it because they understand the idea that we just want competition. And we want someone to keep the insurance companies honest.
What about what the Republicans are not cooperating here? Mitch McConnell has said, why don't we just forget about it now, put it off the table for now, let's come back to it and visit it a couple of months from now and concentrate on job creation.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Well, the largest health insurance carrier in the country last week, it turned out, had raised their rates in the last year 44%. So, yeah, we can keep kicking the can and keep moving this downfield in the health insurance industry. Look, the profits of the 6 biggest insurance companies have never been higher than they are today.
People want to hear about jobs and create. The president called on a State of the Union, put a jobs bill on my desk.
Maura, I'm going to tell you something. This notion that we in Washington can't walk and chew gum at the same time, just last week, Harry Reid, some senators, they're putting together a jobs bill. We in the House have already passed a jobs bill. We're waiting for the Senate to act on it. But that doesn't mean we don't act on health care.
Okay, we're going to take a break. I want to come back. I want to talk about your views on holding terror trials in the civilian courts, particularly here in New York. Stay with us as we continue our conversation with Congressman Anthony Weiner. Welcome back. We're with Congressman Anthony Weiner. Talking a lot about health care, but let's move on to other subjects. A lot of people upset about the idea of having these terror trials, Sheikh Mohammed, here in New York. You have said, and I see you quoted, we can have trials of bad guys and not be quivering like jelly when we do it. That doesn't seem to be the popular sentiment here in New York.
I don't know if it is, but I think that we in public life have to stop with the politics of fear. We not only have trials, terrorism trials all the time, but we are having some now in New York. The fact of the matter is that I am outraged at the idea that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed has been for 6 years in our custody, and yet he has not been put to death. He's not been put on trial. He has not been found guilty and has not met his maker. There's a reason that is, and that is because we've been tying ourselves in knots trying to figure out a way to deal with his case when, in fact, the way we deal with terrorism cases all the time, I think, is appropriate here. And this idea that we are going to somehow shut down the city, why? I don't see any reason why this trial would shut down the city any more than past ones have.
The exorbitant cost just for security, doesn't it make more sense to hold it at a military facility rather than bring it in to the heart of New York, just blocks away from ground zero?
Well, first of all, there's a trial going on today just away from ground zero of Osama bin Laden's driver. It's going on today. This idea that terror trials are somehow unusual, if anything, I believe it's appropriate. Now, if there are additional costs, I believe New York City should get additional money for its terrorism needs, period. But I'm puzzled at exactly why it is that we've got this ring of steel that's going to be proposed around the courthouse to keep who in and who out. You know, when the President of the United States comes here, you know, we close one block. And that comes with a security package that's enormous. So I'm not quite sure I understand why we're treating it this way. Now, I am open to, obviously, any suggestions. The problem is there's a reason why we've been at a standstill on this trial for 6 years, is because we're ignoring the logical way to pursue this case. You know, when terrorism suspects come here, we have the best prosecutors in this part of the country in the world. Our police can take care of things. We have people, we have judges, we have smart juries, like the juries here in New York, who should be the one putting this guy to death. I don't want it to be in some international court somewhere.
I have to ask you, why? What is the purpose of it when the President and our Attorney General have already come out and basically said this guy is guilty and he's either going to go to be sentenced to death or spend the rest of his life in prison,
right?
And this is going to be an opportunity for them really to have a soapbox.
Well, you see, now I understand.
Playing devil's advocate.
Yes,
here.
but Mousali had a soapbox too. Do you remember anything that he said? I mean, basically the first day there was some attention to it. It's not an open trial. If he wants, I mean, he's going to have an opportunity. He's had opportunities to say things already, and what he said is, I did it. This is not the hardest trial in the world. The guy has admitted on 4 different occasions that he did it. He did the crime. It's just a matter of having some closure here. And I have to say something else. I agree with Rudy Giuliani when he testified in the Moussaoui trial and said having this trial is how we do things in the United States. There's a reason we haven't had it up to now. If I can just say, you know, people say, let's have a military tribunal. The problem is he's not a member of the military.
But now Giuliani says this is nothing more than a publicity gimmick.
Well, this is what's happened. We've had a lot of the same people who supported these trials in the past now going on and saying how outrageous this is. My view is this. My view is we're a strong country. We're a strong city. We have our head up. We're going about our business. We are not going to allow ourselves to be brought to our knees by this. And I also think that we have to think clearly about what it is about this process that should bring our city to a halt. And we have to stop with the politics of fear. That's my view of this. We have great prosecutors. You put this guy on the stand, he's going to be convicted. And I hope it's my constituents that lost loved ones on September 11th that look across the bar at justice in this guy and say, guilty, and you're going to go meet your maker. That, to me, would be the way the system is supposed to work.
So you still advocate holding those trials, not only in the civilian court, but here in New York?
No, here's what I say. I say I'm a politician. Let the prosecutors do their job prosecuting. Okay, let's leave the politicians out of this. Let's let the prosecutors do what they think is best. If the Attorney General thinks it's best, and that's a Republican or Democrat, I believe these prosecutors are nonpartisan. They know what they're doing. Let them do their work. We should go about our business.
Let's shift for a few moments to talk about local politics. I know you spent a lot of time down in Washington,
right,
but let's talk about Albany and Governor Patterson versus Andrew Cuomo and the governor's race. Are you endorsing anyone?
Oh, look at the time. I got to get going. Don't I have to have someplace to be?
Why does that sound like a politician?
Look, it is. It certainly looks to all the world like this is shaping up to be a primary. But right now, the facts of the ground, we have one governor. And he's facing an enormously difficult budget. And I think that, you know, what I can do in Washington is do everything possible to get them another round of stimulus money, more help in the health care bill to get them more help for their deficits. And I have a feeling if we have this conversation in the summer or maybe later on, we're going to be talking about a primary. But for now, one isn't happening.
But there's concern in the Democratic leadership of New York. The Democratic nation has reportedly been putting a little pressure, a little muscle toward the governor, to fear that he'll bring down the rest of the ticket if he runs.
Well, can I tell you, right now, the governor isn't doing very well. Governors in all 50 states aren't doing very well. It's not a very good time to be an incumbent, particularly when you're facing the challenges they are. You know, I'm one of these people who believes that, you know, you try to figure out a way to govern when the time is to govern and do politics other. You know, I jousted with Mayor Bloomberg lots of times, but we find a way to work together to try to figure out the common ideals for the city.
But wouldn't Andrew Cuomo be better for the Democrats?
I don't know. I'm a Jets fan. The backup quarterback always looks better than the guy on the field until recently. I think, you know, he's done a great job as Attorney General, and until he says he's interested in doing something else, I think we have to let everyone play in their lanes.
Okay, let's ask about the other thing. You chose not to run for mayor last year, but you said you wanted to concentrate and focus on legislation in Washington. Do you have any regrets for not running?
Well, I might have if I didn't do what I said. I mean, I said I was going to jump into the healthcare thing, and frankly, it's hard to find anyone in Washington who's been working harder on it than I have. I have no regrets in that. I would only be having this influence on the healthcare debate if I didn't run. And I think Bill Thompson ran a credible campaign.
Some say if you had run, you would have won.
Oh, of course I would have won. No, look, my view is I always think I'm going to win a race that I'm in, but I made a tough decision that I'm very comfortable with, that being in Washington, working on the big issues of the day there was a better call for me.
Didn't you tell Jon Stewart that you could have beaten Bloomberg like a rented mule?
No, that's a comedy satire show. You'll forgive me for taking liberties.
So, 3 years from now, are you going to run?
Look, I don't think you'd believe me if I said I wasn't interested in the job, but I'm certainly not going to run for it for 3 years. So I'm focused on doing the stuff in Washington, but it's the only job better than the one I have. Well, shortstop for the Mets is better than the one I have, too, but I don't think I'm ever going to get that.
Congressman Weiner, it's always a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And that'll do it for our program for this week. If you have any comments or wish to see this broadcast again, log on to our website at WPIX.com/News Closeup. I'm Marvin Scott. Thanks so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, everyone, and happy Valentine's Day.